$139,000. The salary of the Wilderness Society president was $204,000. The salary of Defenders of Wildlife president and CEO was $201,000. Earth Justice Legal Defense Fund president Buck Parker was $157,000. And the Sierra Club's Carl Pope salary was $138,000 in 1998 and listed as $199,577 in 99, nearly a 50% raise. And the list goes on. Now, folks, think about it. How many of those $25 contributions does it take you, as you did like I did as a young college student?
Nearly 100 species of wildlife will tumble into extinction. The fact is, no one knows how rapidly species are going extinct. The Alliance figures is an extreme estimate that counts tropical beetles and other insects, including ones not yet known to science, in its definition of wildlife. Another example from the Wilderness Society. We will fight to stop reckless clear-cutting on national forests in California and the Pacific Northwest that threatens to destroy the last of America's unprotected ancient forests in as little as 20 years. Fact: the national forest logging has dropped dramatically in recent years. In California, clear-cutting on national forests dipped to 1,395 acres in 1998, down 89% from 1990. And from the Defenders of Wildlife again. Won't you please adopt a furry little pup like Hope? Hope is a cuddly brown wolf. Hope was triumphantly born in Yellowstone. Fact: there never was a pup named Hope. Says John Valeri, Chief of Research at Yellowstone National Park, we don't name wolves, we number them. Since wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone in 1995, their numbers have increased from 14 to about 160. The program has been so successful that Yellowstone officials now favor removing animals from the federal endangered species list. And one of my favorite that I want to talk for just a minute about, again, comes from the Defenders of Wildlife. And I wish I had some blow-ups of it, but it's a poison alert. Wolves in danger. One of the sections that runs in a newspaper or a letter that goes out to individuals, fundraising letter. Another one that says, a special gift when you join our pack, and it has pictures of these cuddly wolves. More than 160 million environmental fundraising pitches swirled through the U.S. mail last year. Some use the power of cute animals to attract donors. The problem is that in many cases, those campaigns were less than honest. And this was the pitch, and this is the one that caught my attention. In Salmon, Idaho, which is in my district, in Salmon, Idaho, anti-wolf extremists committed a horrible crime. They killed 2 Yellowstone wolves with lethal poison, compound 1080. Please don't allow anti-wolf extremists to kill our wild wolves. These wolf families don't deserve to die. Please, we need your help now. And then, of course, they solicit a contribution. The fact is, the 2 wolves were not Yellowstone wolves, but wolves reintroduced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service into central Idaho against the state of Idaho's objections to reintroduction of those wolves. Some wolves were killed illegally, but the population of wolves continues to increase at a pace faster than federal wolf recovery officials had anticipated. The government expects to remove wolves from the federal endangered species list in 3 to 4 years. In fact, in Idaho, we have already met our commitment of 10 mating pairs. The problem is that they take Montana and Wyoming together and say we have to have 30 breeding pairs within the entire region. Wolves are overpopulating Idaho, better than anyone had anticipated. And they are using these instances, this group, Defenders of Wildlife, to raise money to try to save wolves. Unfortunately, much of the pleading that they do with the American public, at the best, can be called dishonest. I, like you, Mr. Chairman, want to save the environment. We want to make sure that what we do is compatible with species and protecting species. But we also think that human beings play a role in this environment and in our world, and that human beings ought to be considered in this whole equation. Look at what Congressman Walden is going through in Oregon right now, where they've taken 170,000 acres of 200,000 acres of irrigated land that won't have water this year. because a judge has ruled that the sucker fish that they are trying to protect is more important than those people. I yield back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman from Idaho. I'd like to yield to my friend from Florida, Mr. Goss.
I thank the distinguished chairman for his consideration. And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to address the Speaker. Be recognized for permission to file a rule. Mr. Speaker.
What reason did the gentleman from Florida rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privileged report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 136. Resolution waiving points of order against the conference report to accompany the concurrent resolution, House Concurrent Resolution 83, establishing the congressional budget for the United States government.
To these organizations. And then the question comes up, well, what do they spend it for? And when we first got into this thing, we were arguing the idea, are these the people that have the fire in their bosom to go out and take care of the public land? Well, no, as we both discussed in the last while, it's not that. It's more of an idea of raising more money and more money and more money, and where is it spent? I'd like to give a little example, if I could, about an environmental group in the state of Utah. And I'd hasten to say that if that's what the public wants, fine. If the public wants this money to just go into paying lawyers, paying marketeers, paying advertising, K Street type of thing, Madison Avenue, fine. But I thought that most of us who got involved in this thing didn't want that. I thought we wanted to restore the forest and the clean water and the wildlife and do it in a way that is environmentally sound and at the same time to take good care of the energy. And as we know, we've got one coming. But let me just refer to this one group. They're called the Southern Utah Wilderness Society. And some nice people are there, and some of them I think are a little misled, but they probably think the same thing about me. This group raises more than $2 million each year in donations from hardworking people who care about protecting our environment. The money is raised under the direction of the idea of protecting Utah wilderness lands. Send this group some money, and you will help wilderness in the Colorado Plateau, you were told. And so they send out these beautiful calendars saying, this is what you'll protect. However, some of it's in national parks. Only one was in that area, but it was a pretty calendar anyway. However, when you look at their tax reports, you will find that not one dime of this money is actually spent on the environment. Not a penny goes to plant a tree, restore a stream bed, or protect an acre of ground in Utah or anywhere else. Not a dollar to create a habitat to take care of an animal. What this group does is they lobby for the passage of a wilderness legislation. In fact, they lobby to pass virtually the same old, tired, worn-out legislation every year, but they keep raising the ante. I find it interesting that that group went with me, and we said, now, look, no one from Utah really wants this. They said, oh, go back to the time that Congressman Owens was here. He wanted it, and he introduced it. In those days, what they don't realize is Congressman Owens was then a member of the majority party, which was then the Democratic Party. The president was a Democrat, the House and the Senate were Democrat, and I was the ranking member of the committee, and they never, ever asked for a hearing. So I wonder how serious they were about it in those days. As a recent Associated Press story noted, the only impact this bill has in the last decade are the trees that were killed to provide for the paper in which the bill is printed year after year. They are fierce lobbyists. They have a staff of 20 attorneys, lobbyists, and strategists who operate offices in 4 cities, including Washington, D.C. They spent only $11,000 in 1999 in grassroots efforts to reach out to the public, though they claim their primary reason for existence is to educate the public about the environment. But they spent nearly $1 million in the last 4 years to lobby to get their wilderness legislation passed. I privately believe that the last thing in the world this group wants is to pass that bill. That's why they keep moving the goalpost. That's why the numbers keep going up. Above all, this organization is a self-perpetuating consumer of resource and energy. They deal in volumes of paper and plastic. They issue their own credit cards, the Affinity credit card. That's what our environment needs, more credit cards. They do a brisk business in the sale of videos, T-shirts, hats, books, posters. Most of these products are either made from non-degradable materials like plastic or require the cutting down of trees of paper. They send out more than 100,000 newsletters, flyers, and bulletins each year. Folks, that's a lot of trees, and that doesn't even include their reports, press releases, and lawsuits. They are aggressive users of electricity, 4 offices, all these things that they talk about. Now, I'd like to just say something about the lawsuits. If I could move this one chart here. Look at the number of lawsuits that the environmental community has done in 1990 2000. 435 environmental lawsuits. Now, I thought we were out here taking care of the environment. I didn't know we were just in this thing of litigating. It's the most litigious society we've ever had, but no, let's litigate again. And this is how much they've made, $31.6 million in legal fees paid by the U.S. government, whether they won or lost. That's your taxpayer money, folks, $31,000 right there. If they win or lose, they get that money. One case netted $3.5 million for the Sierra Club, and it was questionable whether it was even endangered. The average award is in excess of $70,000, and they risk nothing. So why go out and get you to give them money to plant a tree, to pick up the garbage, to be aware of these things, to take good care of the environment, when you can get in court and make that kind of money? Who's knowing who? Let's be smart about this thing. This thing isn't in there to protect the environment. And that reminds me, when I was back here as a freshman, 1981, the Secretary of Interior was Jim Watt. And he was supposed to come in and see me with Senator Garn over at Indian School. And that morning, I received in the mail something from a group that was going to save the Chesapeake Bay that was all ruined. And it said, Mr. Hansen, if you'll send us $10, $20, $30, $40, $50, we'll do our best to meet with the Interior Committee and Secretary Watt, who is ruining the Chesapeake Bay. And so that afternoon, the Secretary walked in. I said, Jim, I want to show you this. And he laughed. He said, what do you mean? I put $285 million into protecting the Chesapeake Bay. And he said, that's just poppycock. So I sent him $10 because I was curious what was going to happen. 6 months later, I got a letter back. Said, Mr. Hansen, due to your generous contribution, we have met with the Interior Committee of the House, which I sit on, or was sitting on in those days also, and they never walked in, and we have influenced the Interior Department to do our very best to take care of this terrible problem, and we've got that. And if you'll send us some more money, another generous contribution, we'll be there to help do these other things. And I thought, what poppycock. It's just like these people who prey upon the elderly regarding Social Security, when half of those allegations, I should say, are not true. Well, I can just tell you, you just rest assured. There's members here that are on the Resource Committee. We're not going to drill in parks, as the gentleman from Idaho was mentioning, some people put out. That's not going to happen. We're not going to hurt or rape or pillage the ground. If anything, in a moderate and reasonable way, we are standing ready to take care of the ground. So I guess we can ask ourselves the question, do you want to pay attorneys? You know, we do enough attorneys' retirement bills around here anyway. I don't know why we have to make it easy for other people to do that. And those folks seem to do pretty well. American trial attorneys do extremely well. And I don't think we want to do that. I think your money should go to take care of the public grounds of America and take good care of it. And I would hope that every American is a good conservationist and a good environmentalist in the true sense of the word. And that's what I'm hoping would happen. So if you want to spend your money, put it somewhere where it does some good. Do it somewhere where we can have access to the public ground. And while we have access to the public ground, let's each one of us take good care of it. I took my children, went to the very top of the Uinta Mountains, Kings Peak, highest peak in the Uintas. I've taught my children, when we go in an area and we find all kinds of things, we found 5 beer cans right on the top of this beautiful, pristine area. Of course, we crushed them and took them out. Our theory is clean up ours and somebody else's and take it out when you're backpacking. I wish we'd all do that. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from California, the chairman of the Western Caucus, an extremely important member of the Resource Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Rodanovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for putting together this special order. And regarding this topic, which I think is very important to the American people, and as we're speaking here with an audience of probably over 1 million people tonight, I really want to kind of pose a question to the American people. We were dealing with an issue that's important to you and important to me with regard to local influence over federal government lands and the management plans of our national forests and our federal lands. And it was said by some critic about local influences that those people that are closest to the resources really don't speak in the interest of the American people on on public lands, which are lands for the American people, and that somehow the national organizations that send out contribution forms like what you just mentioned are somehow speaking for them. And I, you know, in some ways I wanted to agree that the local perspective on some of these resources, and keep in mind that the Quincy Library Group, which is a group in California of local people that work together with federal forest lands to develop forest policies that are not only good for the forest but also good for the local communities. And it was a better plan than by far any Washington bureaucrat could put together. And my concern was that while people might understand that a local person's influence may not represent the best interest in the American public for public lands, there is another side to that too, and that is that when you have extreme zealots like the list that you just mentioned of people that solicit for any reason or another money to keep their influence, it doesn't necessarily mean that those groups have the environment as the best interest in their minds and in their hearts, and that they pursue public policy that's good for the American people and good for America's public lands environment, because it's not. What it really boils down to is power and influence and keeping that. And I think that's what you've done very excellent, in an excellent way in demonstrating tonight, that it's not necessarily about good environmental policy for federal lands. It's about power, keeping power and influence. And I think that the federal policies become secondary to that. And it's proven by some of the foolish notions that have come up in these last years, like roads moratoriums and the Sierra Nevada framework, which is just a nightmare for our people in the Sierra forests in California, and some of these other issues where people with good intentions and maybe fears that, you know, on the earth we're becoming too populated and that we have to reserve and guard these public lands at all costs, but are basically operating out of fear and not good common sense when it comes to management of public lands. And so I just am grateful that you pinpointed. Even the Sacramento Bee in California did a series of articles on the environmental community and how they are such a money-raising operation whose sole interest, I think, these days has become to remain an influence, and secondarily was the environmental policy that they promoted, that it's really become out of control. And I think the American public needs to really take a second guess, because groups like the Sierra Club and the NRDC do not corner the market on a good environmental policy in this country. And I think the American people need to realize that. It needs to be balanced by somebody who's there. It's like an on-site landlord rather than somebody who's never on site on a piece of rental property. The one who's on site knows what's going on, knows the detail, knows the property better than anybody else. And it's no different than in our federal lands and the Sierra Club and the NRDC and groups like that depend on people that are miles and miles away and never see the resource. So how would they know one way or the other if they're being improperly influenced by these groups or not? They wouldn't know, but they tend to react on the you know, pictures of Bambi on the TV or in their mailers that they get, and they give money. But these people need to know that they are not; those groups are not necessarily promoting the best environmental policy for public lands. And that's what I wanted to come down and kind of reinforce it as what you were saying, is that people need to really be aware of these groups and they need to learn to second guess them and just don't take them for granted that what they're doing is good environmental policy. And thank you for holding this special order in order to bring up points like that, as well as many of the other points that you brought up.
I thank the gentleman from California. Yield to the gentleman from Idaho.
I thank the chairman, and I thank the gentleman from California for his comments. I agree with him fully. You know, the chairman made a good point that, unfortunately, this money that is spent on litigation is money that could go, it's taxpayers' money to start with, and it is money that could go to protecting the environment. When I met with Chief Dombeck a couple of years ago and talked to him about some of the problems we were having in Idaho in our national forests, he said to me that one of the problems they have in the Forest Service is making a decision, because they know no matter what decision they make, they're going to be sued. And last year, in this article that was from the Sacramento Bee, during the 1990s, the government paid out $31.6 million in attorney's fees for 434 environmental cases brought against federal agencies. The average award per case was more than $70,000. One long-running lawsuit in Texas involved an endangered salamander netted lawyers for the Sierra Club and other plaintiffs more than $3.5 million in taxpayers' fund, as the chairman has already pointed out. That's money that could be used for other environmental purposes and actually cleaning up the environment and taking care of the backlog in maintenance that we have in our national forests and in our national parks. And again, it is taxpayer money. One of the main arguments for the roadless issue was that the Forest Service didn't have the money to maintain the roads that they currently had. And so if they couldn't maintain those, how could they justify building more roads? So we might as well make them roadless. Well, if we're spending all that money on lawsuits, then certainly we don't have the money to take care of the roads. You know, one of the things that was interesting in this series of articles is that the effects of these things are actually damaging to the environment oftentimes. And let me read a portion of these articles. Wildfire today is inflicting nightmarish wounds, injuries made worse by a failure to heed scientific warnings. For example, and there's three of them here that they list. In 1994, Wallace Covington, a professor of forest ecology at Northern Arizona University and a nationally recognized fire scientist, and a colleague warned that the Kendrick Mountain Wilderness area in northern Arizona was so clotted with vegetation it was ready to explode. Delay will only perpetuate fuel buildup and increase the potential for uncontrolled and destructive wildfires, they wrote in a scientific analysis for the Kaibab National Forest. Some thinning was done, but not enough. Last year, a large fire swept through the region, carving an apocalyptic trail of destruction. What happened is much worse ecologically than a clear cut. Much worse, Covington said, and that fire is in the future. It's happening again and again. We're going to have skeletal landscapes. The other example, listening to fire and forest scientists, Martha Cattell pleaded in 1996 for permission to log and thin and incendiary mass of storm-killed timber in California's Trinity Alps. This is a true emergency of vast magnitude, Cattell, then supervisor of the Six Rivers National Forest, wrote to her boss in San Francisco. It is not a matter of if a fire will occur, but how extensive the damage will be when the fire does occur. Because of an environmental appeal, the project bogged down. Then in 1999, a fire found its way into the area. It spewed smoke for hundreds of miles, incinerated spotted owl habitat, and triggered soil erosion and stream damage in a key salmon spawning watershed. Well, these stories are something that I hear about daily as I go back to Idaho from my resource advisory group and my ag advisory groups, and I talk to them. We did more damage last year in Idaho with the nation's largest wildfires. We did more damage to the environment, to salmon habitat, to spawning habitat, than was done by any logging practices that have ever been done. And today, as that snow melts and the rains come, hopefully the rains come, that erosion is going to filter down into those streams, and it's going to cover the redds, and consequently you're going to have difficult time with managing salmon habitat. So oftentimes these efforts to address these environmental concerns, the potential for catastrophic wildfire. Today the Forest Service says something like 35% of our national forest is at risk of catastrophic wildfire, 35 million acres I guess it is, of our national forest are at risk of catastrophic wildfires. And these are not just fires. These are cataclysmic fires that burn everything. They burn so hot. They burn the microorganisms. They sterilize the soil down to as much as 18 inches. And for years and years, those forests never recover, if they ever do recover. We still have spots in Idaho from the 1910 fire that nothing will grow on. We do more damage to the environment by not proactively managing it. And of course, every time you try to do that, there's an environmental lawsuit from someone. And now they say, well, maybe we can do thinning if it is not for commercial purposes, as if commercial or business or profit adds some damage to the environment that thinning just to thin doesn't do. Of course, there are the Sierra Club groups that want no cut. The fact is we have to proactively manage these forests, and we can do that. It was managed by fire before. Now we have to get in and do some management so that we don't have these catastrophic fires. And unfortunately, at every step of the way, we're fought by groups who think that man should not touch the forest, that they should be left as natural as they ever were before we came.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, may I ask how much time we have remaining?
Approximately 11 minutes.
11 minutes? Mm-hmm. I thank the Speaker. Let me just say a word about what the gentleman from Idaho just talked about. We were having a hearing not too long ago, and lo and behold, one of the big clubs was there, and I asked this Vice President the question, so why is it that you resist managing the public grounds? Why is it that you resist the idea that we can go in and do some cleaning, thinning, prescribe fires, and take care of it and keep a wholesome forest, like many of the private organizations have? We now have, as the gentleman from Idaho said, fuel load. What is fuel load? It's dead trees, it's deadfall, it's brush. And so now you have the potential of this summer, as last summer, is a careless smoker, a fire caused by a campfire that's left unattended, or a lightning strike, which is one of the bigger ones. And here we go again. We're going to burn the forest. This person from this organization answered me and said, because it's not nature's way. Nature's way is just let it do its thing. Well, I don't know if I buy into that. I mean, you get down to the idea of in 1905, we started the Forest Service, and if you read the charter of the Forest Service, it is to maintain and take care of the forests of America. And that means cleaning it, thinning it, making sure fighting fires instead of getting ourselves in what we had of 2000, the year 2000, the heaviest fire year in record. And I dare say, and I'm no prophet, but I think the fuel load's still there after these 8 years of mismanagement we've had, and we now have 2001 waiting for another one, because talk to your local forester. And the people, Mr. Speaker, who are watching this should talk to their district rangers. They should talk to them and ask the question, have we still got that fuel load? And the answer is a resounding yes. So here we go again. We're going to spend taxpayers' money all over the place because we haven't done what they said in 1905 we should have done, and that's manage the forest. This new administration luckily has a man of the stature of Dale Bosworth, and now the chief, and I'm sure we'll see some management. I have to ask the question, does it mean to be a good environmentalist we let the forest burn to the ground? Does that mean being a good environmentalist? If so, I hope there's not too many of them out there. Does it mean the idea that we drain some of our water resources like Lake Powell that services the whole southwest part of America, and that's the way we live because we've got water? Does that mean being a good one? Yet one of the biggest organizations around, in their book, the Sierra Club, had a whole 4 or 5 pages on let a river run through it and drain Lake Powell. Did the gentleman want to comment on that?
Well, I do, and want to comment on one specifically thing, because I think I got an unusual perspective on being from California, Mr. Hanson, and that is because we're going through the California energy crisis.
I have to be careful there to the gentleman.
And I know, and I love my state, and it's the best state in the world, and don't mess with California. But what I'm saying is that we have really seen the over-influence of environmental zealotism in California, and we're viewing that in our energy policy. We have had the worst problem with the NIMBY attitude on the development of energy generation resources in California, but it's all been backed by your top environmental groups who have really wanted not the population of California to grow, so they basically forced officials to stick their heads in the sand and pretend it wasn't happening until we have an energy crises like now and an upcoming water shortage. I mean, unfortunately, California is going to get to the point where they turn on the faucet, they get no water, they flip the switch, they get no electricity because of the environmental influence on public policy in the state of California. And it's not just in California, it's happening all over the world. Today, this summer, we're going to have to face the fact of whether you either force a temporary relaxation of air quality standards, or you're going to have rolling blackouts and people are going to be dead. And those are the choices that we're facing in California. And you know what? People are going to face that choice all over the country because of the undue influence of the environmental community in this country right now.
You're going to see it this summer, if I may say to the gentleman from California. This summer is going to be the biggest wake-up call that America's had for a long time. 8 years of neglecting these things is now going to catch up with us. When we're asking what does it mean to be a good environmentalist, does it mean to deny access to the public grounds of America for the Americans? I think not. Does it mean that we protect the housefly over children? I don't think so. In southern Utah, we've got a desert tortoise, and we've spent $33,000 per turtle, and we can't really say that it's endangered. You know what our weighted pupil unit is to pay for our kids every year down there? $3,600. So I guess the turtle's more important in some people's mind. But it comes down to this. Can Americans who are great and wonderful and good-thinking people, can we come some common sense on this, or have we come way too extreme in this issue? I think tonight we've tried to make that case that we feel we have. Gentleman from Idaho.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think the point is made that unfortunately the environmental movement has become far too extreme. That doesn't mean that there are good environmentalists out there, many housewives and husbands across the nation that want to take care of our land and our country. I being one of those, and I'm sure you and gentlemen from California also. But as I was saying earlier, you know, many of these things don't really address the environment, or don't address the environment. They hurt it more than they address it. They are trying to use environmental issues for other means. And I will tell you an example in Idaho. We have a sage-grouse problem, declining sage-grouse populations, and we're trying to find out why and what we can do to control it. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Idaho Fish and Game for 20 years have been studying this, and they decided that predators are a main problem with sage-grouse populations. They eat the young chicks. So they proposed a study to take two areas, one where they did some predator control this year, and the other one where they didn't do any predator control, and examine the two of them and see the sage-grouse populations. But two environmental groups have sued them to stop the study because they want to protect the sage-grouse, they say, but their real goal is, their argument is to get cattle off of this land. And if it is shown that sage-grouse can be protected by removing some of the predators, the argument for removing cattle goes away. And so they don't want this study done. So is it truly their aim to try to save the sage-grouse, or is their true aim to get cattle off public land, regardless of what cattle does to the sage-grouse? You know, when I want to look at a true conservationist, an original conservationist, I look at the farmers and ranchers of this country, because it is the land that produces the crop, that produces the grass that the cows eat. That's what they depend on for a living, and they take care of it. Overwhelming majorities of them take care of it. So when I want some true conservation issues, I generally talk to my farmers and my ranchers. And I yield back to the gentleman.
Speaker, I thank you for the time that we've had tonight, and yield back the balance for time.
The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Who do we have? Okay.
Mr. Speaker, move the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
The House today worked on the fiscal year 2002 federal budget resolution. Members sent the measure back to the House Senate Conference Committee for some revisions, and it was refiled for consideration tomorrow. The House also approved a resolution honoring the National Science Foundation on its 50th anniversary, and voted to allow the 20th annual National Peace Officers Memorial Service to be held in the U.S. Capitol. On Wednesday, the House will resume work on the nearly $2 trillion budget outline called a budget resolution. Also, members will take up a wildland fire management measure. It would let the Departments of Interior and Agriculture reimburse agencies for the costs of fighting wildfires. Live House coverage starts at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, here on C-SPAN. For a guide to the House and Senate, C-SPAN's 2001 Congressional Directory is now available. It also includes information on the Bush cabinet. Order your copy for only $10.95, plus shipping and handling, at cspan.org/shop. Or call us toll-free weekdays, 1-877-ON-C-SPAN. That's 1-877-662-7726.